Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Chax Chat podcast. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as director of training solutions and principal at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I'm director of media productions here at Chax Training and Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. And if you'd like your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications and get more information about how you can get your certification as well. All right, Chad, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man. How about you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It is not crazy hot here anymore, but just medium hot in the upper 90s. So it feels cooler.
Yeah, we're at about 80 today, but the humidity left, which is delightful. So I'll take it while it's here. I think it's supposed to get humid again at the end of the week, but I'll take it while I can.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we just got back from Camp Coeur d'Alene in Idaho, right? Yeah, that was great. Idaho weather was good, hot, but good.
Yeah.
Camp Coeur d'Alene is by North Idaho College. And if you've been listening to the podcast, you know they were a sponsor of ours for a while, centered around this event. Again, this year, amazing event, some great speakers, some great topics. And I really felt like, it just keeps getting better every year, man.
I agree. I mean, the level of speakers this year was really phenomenal. I mean, I got to say, I mean, there were some really great sessions that I really enjoyed. Miles, can't think of his last name off the top of my head.
You know what? I was just Googling it. I was just going like, Miles, what was his name? Because he had a really great session. Yeah,
he did. Miles is from the UK. And he's kind of a specialist in assistive technology, not just JAWS and NVDA, like all facets of assistive technology. And he did a great presentation on some of those technologies that I found incredibly interesting. So, and you know what? It's a super small event. And, I think the event is directed mostly towards the people in the colleges up there. But I tell you what, like I said, every year they make it even better and they do a fantastic job. So kudos to Jeremy Seta, who was a guest on our podcast a couple of times, I think. And he does a great job with that conference.
No, absolutely. I really found that what was interesting was the level of knowledge from different people, right? I'm always interested in understanding how different people come through their journey of accessibility. And there were a lot of people that were like, look, I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm just not sure where to start. And so it was really great to be able to help those people along. And we brought so many handouts. I mean, normally we bring one or two. I think we brought 9 handouts to that. So definitely it was a great event. And I'm looking forward to it. I missed Maha, our friend from Lebanon, Maha. And, seeing her and her presentations, but I heard through the grapevine that you are going to an event out there, maybe, if you can convince your other business partner to allow you to fly over to Beirut. So Maha's conference is in Beirut, Lebanon, and as soon as I mentioned it, my wife looked it up and basically, the State Department is saying, don't go there. Right.
Like, don't do it, but, everybody that I've spoken to, I mean, Maha's conference is on a university campus in a really safe part of town. Everybody I talked to said you really have to be careful about the border regions in those areas, right? Like that's really where the danger lies. So I'm excited, a little bit nervous.
Nervous is probably the word. I'm a little nervous for you. I might be doing Chax Chat solo by the time we get back, right? But I honestly lived in Korea for a couple of years and it was fine. And
Yeah.
although you might hear stories of things, it's relatively, you stay out of the areas where it's bad. You don't play in the
Exactly.
traffic in the middle of the freeway. Otherwise,
Exactly.
freeways are dangerous and deadly, but yeah, you don't go out there. Right.
Yeah. I'm really just looking forward to the experience, to be
Yeah.
honest. So, but
No,
yeah.
I completely agree. I'm looking forward to living vicariously through you on that as well, because I really would love to go, but unfortunately I don't have a passport. So yeah, it definitely,
and it's expensive to get it rushed, right? You know what I
yes,
mean? Like
yeah.
to the point where it doesn't make sense,
No,
and
and
I
that's
totally get that.
really the point, is it just, I don't want to, maybe next year, I
Yep.
guess is
Yep. Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Cool. Well, listen,
yeah.
today, you and I have been kind of talking all week, even at the conference we were talking, and early this week we've been talking, and a couple of interesting topics have come up that we thought would really transition well to our podcast, right? And one of the issues that came up, and actually, Dax, I mean, I should really let you talk about this more, but to summarize, we have been talking many times on this podcast about the need to set the tag order in a document
Mm-hmm.
as well as the reading order,
Yep.
right? And you had thrown out some statistic stacks where you had said about 85% of the population is using JAWS and NVDA,
Right.
which we all know those two assistive technology applications leverage the tags pane.
Right.
But there are 15% of users out there who are using assistive technology other than JAWS and NVDA.
Right.
And many of those applications use the reading order instead of the tag order to determine the order of content in a document, right? And you had firsthand experience with a user that contacted you who was having trouble reading a PDF file, and we were just kind of excited about it only because so many times people are like, oh, nobody uses the reading order. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to mess with that. But you had a person who contacted you who was in that exact situation.
Right. They were using Speechify. That was the program that they were using. And for those of you who don't know, while NVDA and JAWS are both considered the standards for assistive technology, there's lots of other programs out there that allow you to read text, and they're called text to speech tools. They're not necessarily assistive technology, but they're designed for people with cognitive disabilities, where maybe, and in the case we're going to talk about here in a second, it was traumatic dyslexia. There was a trauma. The person had I don't know exactly what happened, but a traumatic incident where the brain was injured, and the part of the processing that controlled text and speech and that association was damaged. And so the person has a very hard time reading stuff versus hearing audio. And they reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'm having a real problem with applying for jobs because all of these applications they're sending me, the read order is all over the place. And can you guys please do a podcast on the reading order and the importance of setting the reading order? And I told her, I said, we've actually done we mentioned this almost every other podcast that we do. And I explained to her the nuances. In fact, Chad, I asked her if she'd like to be a guest on the podcast, and she said yes. So
that'll be fun.
That'll be great. I don't want to detail all the story out because I want to give her time to explain her own story. But the bottom line is this is a struggle, and it's a real struggle for people. But on the flip side of that, we just literally the moments before recording this podcast had a conversation with a government entity that I won't name about why do we have to set the read order? And if it's only 15% of the population, isn't 85% enough? And my answer to them was, Well, it depends on what your risk is. If I gave you a parachute, if I had two parachutes on the plane and one of them opened 85% of the time and the other one opened 100% of the time, which one would you want to have me hand you, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is a PDF that doesn't read correctly isn't necessarily a life or death situation, but it's the difference between maybe being sued or not being sued. And that's an important thing when you're talking about risk for organizations.
Well, and to your point, in the example that you're mentioning, Dax, I mean, it could be the difference of a person being able to apply for a job and not being able to apply for that job.
That's true.
I mean,
Yeah.
that can be a significant thing in someone's life. So I guess what we're trying to say is like this is a great example of the fact that reading order does in fact affect people, right? And if you take the stance of 85%, we're just going to focus on the tag order and we're going to leave the reading order, do whatever it does, you could be isolating people and preventing them from reading your content.
Well, I want to talk about the technical aspect of this, right? Because you and I talked about this earlier. Word used to have a terrible reading order situation, whereas if you used floating text boxes anywhere, they were most likely dumped at the end of your document. And if you didn't anchor something inline and use word wrap, it would throw all your images to the bottom of the document and really create a barrier. And it would be a problem. But Word has improved this function. And now it's very hard to get something out of reading order in your document. In fact, I don't think I've seen very many instances. Usually when people are trying to group things together, sometimes it doesn't work well. But even then, I've really not seen recently where the reading order has been wildly out of sequence. However, programs like InDesign, where the reading order is fluid because it's not tied to the physical. Well, I'll let you talk about it. It is, in fact, tied to the physical aspects of the page, but you have more freedom to that, right?
Exactly. I mean, InDesign, although there are a few similarities between Word and InDesign, fundamentally they're very, very different applications, right? Where Word has a natural top to bottom flow, right? I mean, you pretty much just stick your cursor in a Word document, start typing, it's just going to go down and naturally flow from top to bottom, where InDesign is a design application. It's a page layout application.
Right.
And so it's designed to allow you the freedom to put things wherever you want on the page and have creative freedom when you're designing a document. And so in a product like InDesign, the tag order and the reading order are not naturally defined. Right. And as a matter of fact, if you don't pay attention to them, it could be a horrendous experience. You know what I mean? Because so for the tag order, by default, InDesign just goes from the top left corner of the page across and down. So if your content is laid out that way, you could get lucky. You could get lucky and your tag order is pretty close. But the reading order in InDesign is defined in the layers panel.
Yes.
And the layer structure is fundamentally created based on the order in which you create objects in InDesign.
Right.
So,
I don't know about you, but I definitely don't create things with the thinking about the read order in which I'm creating them. Right.
Never. Yeah. But I'll tell you, Dax, I mean, you know this, I was working on a project for a client yesterday and it was about a 28-page document. Right. And it was very, very bitsy. Right. Like all these pieces that they used to build this. And I had to go through page by page in the layers panel and, manipulate the order of objects, and you have to be a little bit careful because you could send objects behind other objects if you're not careful,
Well,
when you're doing this.
And that goes to a really important thing about how we design. And you and I have a class called Designing with Accessibility in Mind. And we really don't cover this specifically as a technical how-to, but we cover it as a concept of how you build your document really can affect how it exports. And in this case of this government entity, they're using layers. They have a text layer, and then an images layer, and a background layer. And they actually have a really cool layer that I didn't think about. They numbered the images in the document using an icon, like a circle with a number in it. So they can turn that off and on to see what image 1, image 2, image 3, et cetera, are, because they have very specific templates and they have areas that those things need to be in. I thought that was really cool. But the problem is that when you have your text on one layer and your images on another layer, you're not going to be able to set the read order using anchoring, because if you take the image on the images layer and you anchor it into the text on the text layer, that image is now on the text layer. And so the reason they did this, and I totally understand, is that they have a lot of editors, and the editors are not InDesign people. And it's really nice to be able to lock down the images layer and just give them the access to the text layer, and they're not using InCopy. So, they don't have the ability to kind of give them another tool. So I get why, but this goes back to trade-offs. If my workflow is a certain way, I have to be willing to live with the consequences of what that means. And in this case, it means the read order might not be something you can set until you're in the PDF document. And imagine you've got a PDF that's 5 or 6 pages with 100 different elements on the page for each one. That's a lot of reading order to set.
Well, and honestly, I would argue, like, in a situation like that, sorry about that.
It's okay.
In a situation like that, I traditionally, I try not to create a separate document for the one that I'm going to make the accessible PDF from. I like to do the single source approach, right?
Yep.
So this document can be used for print. It can be used for, everyday PDF, and it can be used for an accessible PDF. But in a situation like you're describing, where they have all of those layers, I may end up doing a save as on the document and then just flatten all the layers.
Right.
And that gives me the control to adjust the reading order in InDesign, which I think you would agree with me is a lot easier than doing it in the PDF file.
Yep.
And that way I could go through and I could adjust my reading order, and that's the file I'll use to make my accessible PDF. And then you still have your untouched version with all the layers in case you have further edits or anything like that, and approach it that way. That would be how I would do that.
And that's a great approach. But what happens when you have to make changes to that document, and they come back and have iterations 2 and iterations 3, then you have to be willing to live with the idea that, hey, you might have to go back and reorder all those layers, right?
Well,
now what I think I would do, though, is I would do much of the layer ordering as I can. I would put my text layer in the right order, just missing the images. And then that way, when you do flatten it, everything's really just putting the images kind of in the right place. So I think that there is a way to kind of have a hybrid experience. Again, it is just about understanding your workflow and what you're willing to live with. And in this case, they were toying with the idea of, is it worth the effort for the risk? Is a risk of 15% of the population might sue us to do all of this extra work? And my answer to that was, if you had to have a third-party program to set the reading order, then I could see, we've got to invest this other money. It's a special thing because these 15% of the population want to use these other tools. But the problem is, the thing that's staring everyone in the face is that InDesign has the tools. It has the capability. But because of the workflow, you're the one creating the barrier. And we're working with them to fix this. I mean, this is not this is just the way it is. They're just exploring this, trying to understand what's causing us to work this hard. And are there ways to make it simpler? And I think this is one of the things that you and I really excel at. And this goes to anyone listening to this program right now. If you're struggling with your InDesign file, trying to figure out what to do, or your Word document, or your workflow, because you've got editors working in Word and we're doing it in InDesign. And then we've got to make a print PDF and a web PDF, and we want to interactive PDF and all these things. And you're trying to struggle to figure out how to do it all. Reach out to us, because we have solutions for you. And, you know, I think maybe you can talk to this, Chad, just about our experience, you know, why we have the solutions.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we have the solutions because, I mean, I've been using InDesign for 25 years. I think we're on that marker, 25 years. You know, and I mean, you know, to be honest, I mean, I was in a design role prior to, you know, entering the accessibility space. So, I mean, even now I use InDesign every day, and so we know how the program works, and we know how to get it to do what we need to do, and I think that's what makes us, you know, valuable, you know, because, you know, we know how to get around those hurdles and get around those roadblocks that people run into.
I've worked in print shops where I've had a chair on rollers and a like cafeteria type floor, and I had 2 Macs and 3 PCs, and I had projects going on every single one of them. It was an ADHD person's dream.
Oh, sure.
Because I could just get bored with one file and scoot over and work on the other one, and then go work on this other one. And I literally would have all the computers open, and I'd be working in Illustrator in this one and InDesign in that one. And actually, I think it was Quark Express in one, and then
at that time,
a PageMaker in the other, you know, because it was all this PageMaker back then. So I think, you know, again, guys, if you're struggling, reach out. We are here. You can reach us at training@accessibilityunraveled.com, or find us on LinkedIn, or go to our website. Lots of ways to get a hold of us at our conference events. In fact, our next event is going to be Adobe Max, right?
Yeah. So, boy, we have them lined up. So yeah, Adobe Max. You and I are going to be at Adobe Max. We're both speaking at it. You in person, me virtually. Immediately after Adobe Max, we're going to be down at Enabling, which is in Washington, D.C. So if you're in the DC area, check it out. I'd love to see you there. I'd love to talk to you and chat about accessibility, you know, as we do. And then after that, Dax, we have Accessing Higher Ground.
Yep.
And that is November.
Yep.
November. Yeah. So yeah, Max and Enabling October, Accessing Higher Ground November.
Right.
And then I feel like we get a break in December.
No. Well, we have the Design and Accessibility Summit right after.
That's in November too.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're booked, and then after that it's March for CSUN. So yeah. Yes. And we're doing pre-conference labs at each one of these. Well, Max, we're doing a lab. Unfortunately for anyone listening, it's filled. It's unless they add another session. My 2 sessions are already filled. But Accessing Higher Ground, we're doing a full day lab on document testing with NVDA, or is it document testing with Acrobat? One of the two. Right. And then the other one, for CSUN, we're doing document testing with Acrobat, understanding how to actually evaluate a document for accessibility. So, you know, definitely good stuff. If you want some hands-on experience and you're not able to hire us to come out to your place, or you don't attend one of our classes, go attend one of these conferences, because I definitely can't recommend them high enough. Enough of that. I wanted to talk. So I guess the bottom line here, guys, is that if you know, people say, well, why should you have to set the read order? What says you should have to set the read order? In fact, most of the people I find are from Germany or Europe that say tags tree is the only thing that matters. Well, that's because they're looking at the PDF UA as a standard. And PDF UA is not accepted by any country or state as the standard for accessibility. Now, it is the backbone of the rules that make a PDF a PDF. I 100% agree. But if you say, I'm forced to do this because I work for this agency or this state or this federal agency, no state or federal agency adopts PDF UA as the standard officially, right? They all adopt the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. And for item number 4, right, which is the principle for robust, it says content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technology. Now, notice that it said user agents and assistive technology. So NVDA and JAWS are assistive technology. The other category of screen readers are considered user agents. I mean, it is very clear. And the guideline specifically says, that's kind of the principal overview. But guideline 4.1 compatible says maximize compatibility with current and future user agents, including assistive technology. So it very clearly says that your document must be readable by the things people are using. Right.
Right. And so it doesn't definitively say reading order, but it says it has to be able to be read by all user agents. And if that user agent uses the reading order, you got to set the reading order.
Well, here's a prime example. Well, people say, well, I can't control what people are using. If they're using some obscure reading program, why should I have to follow with that? Okay, what about Acrobat? Acrobat's not an obscure reading program, and Acrobat uses read aloud. And what does read aloud use? The reading order. So if you want to say, well, I'm not going to cater to someone using DAX's screen reader program, text to speech program, fine. What about Acrobat? And so, in fact, the people that we were talking to earlier before this podcast, the reason they were having the conversation is their supervisor looked at one of the PDFs that they had remediated on their cell phone, and the reading order was all over the place. And they said, this isn't good. Go back and try again because it needs to be accessible. And the answer was, well, it is accessible. You're just using the wrong tool. And I don't know about you, but I think we all have phones, and they're either an Android or an iPhone. And, it should work on one of those two devices.
I mean, honestly, it's a very similar paradigm to web development. The reason why WCAG got involved, well, not WCAG, but the W3C got involved with web development was to standardize on how HTML should be structured for the vast array of user agents, right?
Yep.
I mean, we could go back to the early 90s of Netscape Navigator and Internet Explorer, right? But in reality, even today, we've got Chrome, Safari, Opera, Edge,
Bing. Bing's a search engine.
Yeah, Bing's a search engine.
Edge is the
Edge. Yeah, I mean, we've got all these web browsers, and for the most part, you can view a website in any of those web browsers reliably.
Yep.
And the reason that you can do that, because in the early 90s, it was not that way.
Yes.
Like
I built websites that at the top said this for the best experience use. And that point was Internet Explorer or Netscape Navigator. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, that was isolating people, right? I mean, that, they had a preference of what, and so I guess my point here is that this is what we're talking about with the reading order is a very, very similar situation. We're trying to make these files be read by all user agents, all assistive technology. And the way that we do that is cover all your bases and make sure your tag order is correct, make sure your reading order is correct.
Well, and I wonder, if someone would put on the top of their document, this document best read by using NVDA or JAWS, right? But there, the person that we might have on our podcast, that has dyslexia, I asked about that. I said, well, why aren't you using NVDA or JAWS? Those are really the accepted programs. She goes, they're too complicated for me to use. They're too frustrating. And I go, okay.
Yeah.
How do you argue with that? I
don't get to tell somebody, you know what I mean? Like, I don't get to tell somebody, oh no, it's not confusing. You just need to learn how to use it. If they find it confusing, then it's not the tool for them. Right.
Right.
No.
So
anyway,
So I think it's so definitely. So the next thing I want to talk about, because today is all about, I don't know, soapbox conflict, their side, our side kind of thing. This is another one that we've talked about quite a few times, but I'm in a battle with a person on LinkedIn in a thread about, I posted this help that was from Word, that if you have the title style in Word, when you export that out, it exports as a p tag. And most of the time we want the title of our document to be read as an H1. And so there is a way you can go into Word and actually change that item to be mapped to heading level 1. I posted the tip and how to do it, and immediately got flamed and said, title tag should not be a heading level 1, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm in a war with this person on defending back and forth on whether or not we follow the code or we side with the end user. And so I want to talk about this with you, Chad, because I think this is a really interesting conversation, because there's a couple of different facets to it. One, most people in the United States let me rephrase that. Most people who are not programmers think that the title should be an H1. Mm-hmm. Most people who are programmers or are in the European areas, Germany, the Netherlands, that area, have all cited that the title tag should be the title tag. And if the screen reader program doesn't interpret the title tag, so what? Make them fix it. Yeah. And you and I, it's such a frustrating thing, because my answer is people who use screen readers, people who have disabilities, are already a marginalized portion of the community. And when you say, we're going to do it this way because it's right, in air quotes, right for who? Right?
Yeah.
Because none of the people who are digesting the document are looking at the tags tree or the code and going, oh, they used a title tag there instead of a paragraph, or they used a paragraph there instead of or an H1 instead of a title tag. Right. And they just care about their user experience. So when I have the ability to change that user experience and make it better without damaging other people or damaging the way a document might be interpreted by other screen readers, then why not?
Yeah. Yep. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, this is one of those areas where you and I are very much aligned. And to maybe give a little bit of context to this, right? So the title tag has recently been added in the PDF UA standard, right? So
PDF UA 2.
PDF UA 2, right? And so they said, hey, we're creating this new tag called title that is to be used for the title of your document. And we're all like, okay, great. I mean, I'm all about semantic markup. I mean, 1.3.1, right? 1.3.1 info and relationships is basically describing semantic markup, right? It's basically saying tag content is what it is. And so when you give me a title tag and you say, hey, use this for the title of your document, I'm like, okay, that sounds really great. The problem, right, is that currently JAWS and NVDA voice the title tag as a P tag.
Yep.
Right.
What they do is they don't voice any importance to that text whatsoever. I mean, that's the result. When you get to this phrase, if you had an advertisement of an article somewhere in the document, some kind of byline, and then your title, you would have no cue that the title, when you got to it, was the title of the document. It would just read like every other paragraph in that document. And to me, that's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that in and of itself violates info and relationships.
Right.
Right. I mean, the title is important, so it needs to be voiced as important. But when the title is just voiced as any other paragraph, that importance is lost to the user. Yeah. And they have no idea that this is a key component of the document. So yeah, I mean, I would love to use the title tag. And I'm hoping that JAWS and NVDA are working on it, and eventually they're going to announce, I would hope that they say, this is my document title. Right. I don't know how exactly they're going to voice it, but they're going to voice it with some type of importance. Yeah. And that's really what we're looking for. But in the meantime, because it doesn't work, you and I take the approach of, okay, let's make it an H1. That way it is voiced with importance. It is obvious to the end user, and it's going to provide them with a good reading experience.
Well, and I really think that it's more than just the fact that it is the title, but it's an anchor. It's a navigational element. And being able to press the H key or the Shift H key to navigate to that specific piece of text is a key function of document structure. And when you make it a paragraph tag, there is no way to keyboard access that text at all. There is no way for the user to say, I want to go back to the title of this document and hear what it is, because it's just a paragraph in a sea of paragraphs.
That's a really good point, Dax. Now that you bring that up, because when I press the H key to navigate through my headings, I would want it to read the title, right? And that's possibly part of the delay in adoption, from JAWS and NVDA, right? I mean, maybe they're trying to figure out too, like, hey, this is a landmark. We should really be reading this as well.
Right.
So they'd have to update their technology that when you hit the H key, it includes the title and it voices that as well. Or also give us a unique keyboard shortcut to read the title.
I was just looking for my card, and there is a shortcut key to read the title of the document. And it is... and if you don't have one of our cards, guys, these are the NVDA shortcuts you need to know. And I believe it is Control-Alt-T is the shortcut for reading the title of the document. And it will read, but it's the document title in the image, the file, right? Not the
metadata.
Yeah, it's when you name a PDF, you have the ability to set the file name, but also the title as a metadata property of the document. And so when you use that shortcut key, it actually does voice the title, but not the title on page 1. They could be different. You could make whatever you want for the title of the document. If the title on the cover page is, October Photoshop magazine, but the title could be Kelby 1 : / whatever, something longer, then they could be different.
Yeah. And I mean, as we're talking about this, we were just discussing the fact that there's 2 orders in a PDF file. With the title tag, there's going to be 2 titles in a document, potentially, right? So you've got the metadata title, which is required for accessibility. Every document has to have a descriptive title that describes what the document is about. But then we're also saying there could be a title tag. Now, to be fair, I think a lot of times they very well may be one and the same.
They really kind of should be.
Yeah.
And I found that the shortcut key is Insert T. That's the shortcut key. Okay. Insert T. Regular and T just goes
metadata title.
Yes. So regular T, just pressing T will take you from table to table to table, right? Shift T will take you from the T to the previous table, but Insert T will read the title of the document in the metadata, not the title of the title tag in the tag structure. So yeah, but the bottom line to this is that we're trying to overcome barriers. Right. And it would be different if I made a change to the title for it to say something else. I mean, let's just say I added actual text to the title that said title, Dax's year-end report. Right. And it was tagged as the title tag, but I know the title tag is going to be announced as a P. So I'm going to add actual text to fill in that gap. Right. And then maybe 5 years down the road, we actually get NVDA and JAWS to voice the title tag. Now they're going to hear title, and then whatever I say, because I forced that tag to have actual text that says title. So that would be an improper use of modifying a tag to make it say something it shouldn't. Right. But if I change that title to be a heading level 1, I make it a heading level 1, an H1 tag, and not leave it as a title, then it's not a barrier. It doesn't announce something incorrectly. Heading level 1 for a title of a document is absolutely appropriate. Now, title might be more semantic.
Sure.
But it's not a barrier. It doesn't provide a bad user experience for the end user. So I think approach is different, right? And, we talk about the caption tag. It's supposed to be a child of the element it's captioning. So if it's a figure, it should be inside the figure tag. But we both know JAWS and NVDA will not voice caption when it's a child of a figure. It has to be outside the figure tag. And if taking it outside the figure tag at some point down the road broke the way NVDA and JAWS, announced caption, then I guess I would change my approach. One that you can talk about, Chad, that's right now is the idea of where alt text goes, right? In InDesign, where does alt text for hyperlink go versus where it's supposed to go?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in InDesign, so like if you want to add alt text for a figure, that is accomplished in the Object Export Options dialog box. So you can go to the Object menu, choose Object Export Options, and that gives you the ability to actually add actual text or alternate text in the same place, right? So whatever you want to do there, if you do have an image of text and you want to add actual text, you can do it right there. But you're right, Dax. Then, as we've talked about before, one of the PDF UA requirements is that every hyperlink contains alternate text for every link. And just a review, right? I mean, a lot of people say, well, that seems really redundant, right? But it came from a time when it was really common to use click here or download here to indicate the text of the hyperlink. And that is not very helpful to the end user. And so somebody made the request that we add alt text to the hyperlink. That way there's more descriptive information. And in InDesign, that is accomplished in the hyperlinks panel. When you create a new hyperlink of text or an object, actually, it'll bring up the hyperlink dialog box, and there's a little accessibility button down there where it has a field for alternate text. So, and I don't know how deep you want to dive into that, Dax.
Right, but the barrier is so the whole point of this whole stream here, this topic is that right now InDesign, when you put text into what is considered the accessibility description, the link description, it gets populated into a field in the PDF called the content key. But the content key is not read by assistive technology. Yeah. So while PDF UA says, hey, this is what we should do, fix it in InDesign, because before they were just adding it as alt text, which worked. Now it doesn't work. And so there are instances where you might go in and add alt text back to the hyperlink. However, InDesign or Acrobat has now removed that capability from the kind of WYSIWYG editor. So you could go into the tag properties itself. And we haven't talked about this, Chad, but here's the thing. You could go into edit tag and literally add that key in there and write alt text, and then, literally put the value of your alt text right there and basically force that element to have both alt text and the content key. And so it won't voice both of them. It'll only voice one. But again, it's the bottom line of what we're trying to talk about here, guys, is that when it comes to following the rules or providing a good user experience, as long as my good user experience doesn't create a bad user experience later on when technology catches up, I'm going to do it every time.
Yep.
Yeah. And because I care about the user experience. And I'm not saying that people who want to follow the code don't care. I just don't want to make a decision that I know will make a bad user experience. I'm just not, that's just not where I'm at.
Yeah. And you and I are very, very passionate about that. Right. I mean, as much as I want to follow the standard, I mean, we were talking about the contents key. The only reason we're doing it right now is to get a clean report in our checker. Yep. Right. I mean, that's really the only reason we're doing it, because it really has no benefit to the end user.
Right.
So it's a challenge. And I thought you were going to go here, but weren't you going to say that now when you add so now in Acrobat, they added an extra field when you go to the properties of a tag, and one is alt text for hyperlinks. One is alt text for images.
Well, Chad, the thing about hyperlinks with inside a PDF is that for a minute, Acrobat released this new alt text for links field that was, and then we had the alt text for images field, just like you said. But the problem was that initially, when you were on a link, the alt text for images field was disabled. You couldn't get to it. And now they've unlocked that so that you can add the alt text into that field. I'd love it if they just freaking populated both of them, and it's not going to voice it twice. Populate the content key and the alt text, and it's only going to say one.
I agree 100%. I wish they would have taken that approach. I wish they would have done a little bit more due diligence on that and just said, hey, let's just put it in both places. That way we're covered, Yeah. But, we have to be careful when we say that, because I run into a lot, especially in InDesign. People think that if they put text in alt text and in actual text, that it's better.
Yes.
And the reality is only actual text is read. But if you're putting the same thing in there, no harm, no foul, right?
I disagree with you. I disagree with you, because when you put actual text on an object, it no longer says what the object is. It'll no longer say figure or graphic, whatever. It just says whatever you have the alt text. And some cases, if people say bar chart showing such and such, okay, I get that. I would understand that if I'm listening to it, that it didn't say graphic. But if it just says John sits down at the table reading his Kindle, that could sound just like rest of the part of the sentence.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't know that they're really talking about an image. So
no, you're right. You're right.
With great power comes great responsibility, Chad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, listen, I hope you guys found this podcast interesting. Dax and I, we've been chatting, most of the better part of this week about this topic. So we hope you found it interesting and you learned some new things. We want to thank you for tuning in today, and we will see you next time. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.